In this episode, I speak with founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Green Queen, Sonalie Figueiras. Key points addressed were Sonalie's immense impact media platform called Green Queen and how it has risen to be one of the most prominent media platforms for vegan issues in all of Asia. We also discussed Sonalie's predictions as to where the vegan world is headed in the next 5 years and how she believes this pivotal time will not only reshape the worldwide economy, but also require a mental adjustment for the current vegans in it. Stay tuned for my fascinating talk with Sonalie Figueiras. Hi, I'm Patricia, and this is Investigating Vegan Life with Patricia Kathleen. This series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from food and fashion to tech and agriculture, from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas. Our inquiry is an effort to examine the variety of industries and lifestyle tenets in the world of vegan life. To that end, we will cover topics that have revealed themselves as common and integral when exploring veganism. The dialogue captured here is part of our ongoing effort to host transparent and honest rhetoric for those of you who, like myself, find great value in hearing the expertise and opinions of individuals who have dedicated their work and lives to their ideals. You can find information about myself and my podcast at patriciakathleen.com. Welcome to Investigating Vegan Life. Now let's start the conversation. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. I am your host, Patricia, and today I am so elated to be sitting down with Sonalie Figueiras. Sonalie is the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief at Green Queen. You can find out more on both of her websites about the information we talk about today at www.greenqueen.com.hk, as well as www.ekowarehouse.com. That is ekowarehouse.com. Welcome, Sonalie.
Hi, Patricia. So nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to climb through. We were just talking off the air a great deal, and we have a lot in common and a lot to cover today. I'm really excited to unpack everything that you're doing. So I look forward to doing that with you.
Let's do it.
Yes. For everyone listening, in case you're new to the podcast, I will offer a quick bio on Sonalie before I start asking her to kind of give us her personal vegan story and rhetoric therein. But before we get to that, I will proffer a quick roadmap for today's podcast in the line of inquiry in which we will follow. We'll first ask her, as I said, about her own personal vegan journey so that we can kind of unpack her own narrative and where she's coming from. Then we'll turn to defining terms. This is something we do with every episode in this series, and it's key to understanding even the most rote of terms in the vegan world, such as the word vegan, and how our guests are internalizing it and using that word. We'll then turn to unpacking everything that Sonalie is doing at thegreenqueen.com, as well as Eco Warehouse. And then we'll wrap everything up with rapid fire questions for those of you in our audience who have written in with questions pertaining to the aspects that Sonalie's expertise can speak best to. So before asking her some questions, as promised, a quick bio. Serial social entrepreneur Sonalie Figueiras is a founder and editor-in-chief of Green Queen, an award-winning impact media platform advocating for social and environmental change in Hong Kong, with a mission to shift consumer behavior through inspiring and empowering original content. She is also the founder and CEO of Eco Warehouse, the global sourcing platform for certified organic products, with a mission to make safe, quality food accessible and affordable for the whole planet. With over a decade of experience in publishing, digital marketing, organic trade, and health and sustainability, she is an eco-wellness industry veteran with a keen eye for market trends and sought-after international speaker and moderator, sharing her expertise on stages across Asia and beyond, including TEDx and Harvard Business School. So, Sonalie, I cannot wait to unpack all of that with you, but prior to getting to your current endeavors, I'm hoping you can kind of draw us a platform as to what your own personal vegan journey or story was that brought you to launching these endeavors.
So what's really interesting about my journey is that when I started these platforms and I went on this journey, I wasn't vegan. I was very sick. I have 2 health conditions that had been misdiagnosed. I have Hashimoto's thyroiditis and I have endometriosis, 2 diseases that affect women more than men, that have very little funding and that have no cure. So are not as interesting for drug companies. So basically, I was very unwell from the time I was about 14. It got really bad when I was about 18, 19, when I was in college in the States. And it just kept getting worse, and I kept seeing doctors, and I wasn't getting cured. And I did what I always do in these situations, which is take control. I had trouble trusting any of the doctors I was seeing because I felt dismissed, disconnected, unheard. And I decided I'm going to research this myself. And at the time, obviously, Google was around, and I went really crazy and really down a few rabbit holes. And I realized that there was a good chance that I was being exposed to a ton of toxins through food and through the products I was using that were interfering with my body's hormonal balance, and that were either worsening my conditions, or also probably had caused them. So I grew up eating a lot of chicken from the US, and that was considered, imported chicken in Hong Kong, and that was considered, expensive and good. And I grew up eating red meat, again, usually from the US. I grew up eating drinking a lot of milk. I loved milk as a child. I remember my sister hated milk, so I would drink my milk and her milk. And let's face it, if you add that all up, I'm eating chicken, I'm eating a lot of eggs, I'm eating meat, and I'm eating so much milk drinking so much milk every day. I was pumped with hormones and antibiotics.
Yeah.
And when I found out how my food was grown and how my products were being made and the ingredients that they contained, and when I found out that, the soil that was growing my food was depleted of nutrients because of, the way we farmed today. And when I found out that this was then causing water pollution and air pollution and making people sicker, but no one was talking about it. No one. Not my doctor, not my parents, not the newspapers at the time. This was before social media, took off. Nobody, nothing, nowhere was I getting any information about all of this. I was completely shocked. It really just changed my life. I could not believe that this information existed. It was out there, and yet no one was talking about it. So I completely changed my life, and that involved changing what I ate. I first changed where I was purchasing my food from. So I started looking for organic fruits and vegetables. I started looking for heritage pantry ingredients. I started looking for, slow food if I could find it. I started, trying to make sure that my seafood was wild, that my meat and chicken and dairy and eggs were antibiotic free, hormone free, that my milk was organic. But I was in Hong Kong. This is 10, 12 years ago, and it was really difficult to find some of these products, and it was extremely expensive. I also experimented with many diets. My first attempt at veganism was in 2011. I watched the seminal documentary that I think planted the seed for veganism for me, and that is Forks Over Knives. And that's, of course, the documentary that, it's sort of not as talked about today, which is a shame, because out of all the documentaries that exist out there, I find it to still be today the most maybe balanced and the most kind of, the least kind of extreme, and with serious evidence behind it, which is, of course, the China study by T. Colin Campbell, which is now world famous in part thanks to the movie. And when I watched that was my first connection that I made with the fact that maybe eating animals was not so good for me and not so good for the planet.
Yeah.
And so I decided, but at the time in Hong Kong and just around the world, that movie was really associated a lot with raw veganism. I don't know if, so I actually went raw vegan for a while. And I will say I did the typical thing. I got myself a Blendtec instead of a Vitamix, because I'm cheap and I found it at a secondhand shop. And I got myself, a dehydrator, and I got myself a juicer. And I went on that path of, juice pulp crackers and green juice and zucchini hummus and zoodles. And, this is in 2011. So it's a long time ago. And again, in Hong Kong, that was quite rare and very unmainstream, but there were 5 or 6 raw vegan chefs around that were, giving classes and doing things. And so that's what I did. And I loved it. But I can tell you that around me, for example, my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, he hated it. He thought that was so just not for him. Like any raw vegan food, to this day, he kind of has a reaction to it, because for him, food has to be warm. That's something that's just like very important to him. And I have to say that in Asia, especially in Hong Kong, where the doctrine of the traditions of TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, are strong. There is a cultural kind of, tradition of listening to TCM knowledge and expertise and advice. And they don't really believe in that it's healthy to eat raw so much. So anyway, it just felt very difficult to stay raw. But I do remember during that time, I ended up in Berkeley, and there was Cafe Gratitude, and I was waiting to go to Cafe Gratitude. I felt like this place was going to be my temple, and I went there, and it was. I mean, I still remember their carrot juice pulp crackers. I mean, they were just the best crackers I'd ever had. Their chocolate mousse cake, and this was just food that felt so alive to me, and I really connected with that. I really connected with the health benefits of raw veganism. And to this day, I still do a few of the things of raw veganism. But I will say that if you love food and you love socializing and you love, cooking, I found it difficult to stay on it full term. So I went back to eating a full omni diet, but I will say that I substantially cut down on meat, eggs, and seafood. And I had never been, I didn't really like chicken. I know in the US, white chicken breast is everyone's favorite protein. I never liked that. Meat was something, I did like a juicy burger once in a while, but I wasn't, someone who wanted to eat a steak every day. I was always more interested in the vegetables. So I consciously kind of shifted, or maybe unconsciously, towards more vegetables and just less of that stuff. And then Green Queen was starting to grow, and I remember I first discovered this kind of new wave of food tech companies in 2014, 2015, and we first wrote about it in Green Queen. We first wrote about Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, new wave foods, and a couple of others. The Chilean one, the No Company, I think. These were like maybe the first 5 or 6 companies that were this second generation of food techs. And I really felt like there was something in these companies that was going to be the future. Mm-hmm. And so I started keeping an eye on it. And then at the same time, I started doing a ton more research into climate change and carbon footprint and starting to cover that more. I think Green Queen had really grown as a media company, and we had started out being more of a kind of a lifestyle guide. First, it was just my blog, and then in 2013, it really became a media platform with other writing and more of a reporter feel to it, and a weekly newsletter. But it still was very much for Hong Kong at the time, and very much for, how can you live a greener and healthier life? So focusing a lot on nutrition, health and wellness, food trends. But the more I delved into, I guess the more I delved into my research, which is what I do anyway in the background, the more I realized there was this connection between health and planetary health. And they were not at all two separate topics. And I found it really interesting that in the rest of the media world, you had health and wellness media on one side, and then you had kind of sustainability media on the other. And for me, that never made any sense, because for me, the connection was, well, if the planet's healthy, we're healthy. If we're healthy, the planet's healthy. Kind of, there is a connection. So they need to be in the same frame. And the more I researched, the more I realized there's no way that I can be eating meat and eating seafood. I mean, we don't talk enough about seafood. And this is around the time when I found out what happened to baby cows, calves, and how they were taken away from their mothers to produce milk, and how cows were kept pregnant all year, and all of this. And it really just, I was having trouble stomaching that. Then I found out what happened to male chicks for eggs. And I just realized that I was being sold a bit of a lie with this kind of ethical meat. And I still have people fighting about this every day. Just yesterday on my LinkedIn, a couple of meat producers in I think Australia were arguing with me about how actually regenerative farming is good for the world and ethical meat farming. And that's okay. There are some arguments to support that. And if it were a perfect world and we all ate, highly nutritious food grown in an organic way, and if we only ate meat, once or twice a week, and we had, loads of fish stocks, and we just had wild seafood, again, once or twice a week, and we grew our own eggs in our backyard, maybe there's an argument for this. But the reality is that's not even close to where we're at. And then, of course, what happened is, when I decided to abstain from eating animal flesh and really getting away from that, or reducing it a huge amount, I changed inside. Mm. I connected with the other side of veganism, which is the spiritual side and the ethical side, and the idea that I felt lighter as a being. I felt just like my footstep on the earth was I was treading more lightly, because I wasn't consuming flesh. And then I just felt better. It was easier to digest food, and I've had food digestion problems my whole life because of some of my health concerns. I felt brighter. I just felt more energized. All the stuff that everyone talks about. I felt it. And I decided that since I was on this journey, and when I made the connection that the single biggest way that you can reduce your carbon footprint is to reduce meat and dairy, I decided, you know what, there's enough media in the world and in Asia that focuses on advertising meat and dairy and seafood. Not that we did it a lot, but we'd still have the odd ethical butchers in Hong Kong, or why how to choose your wild seafood. But I decided, no, that's it. I'm going to be a slaughter-free plant-based media, and I'm going to focus on the alternatives. I'm just going to make this conscious choice, and I'm not going to cover dairy anymore. I'm not going to cover restaurants that, I'm not going to actively cover restaurants that are omni. I'm just going to let other media do that. And I'm going to just carve out my space as shining a light on, the heroes and the brands and the activists that are moving the world food system closer to a more sustainable, more just, more equitable reality. And so, yeah.
That was around, like, when did you, it's interesting because you kind of brought your company with you. It's interesting that, you had Green Queen around as you were looking at sustainability. And then as you became vegan, you took the emphasis of the media outlet with you. When was that around?
Yeah, that was around 2017, 2018.
Nice. It's a good time.
Yeah, it was a good time. But it just happened to be that's, yeah, I think for me, you see, Green Queen is not, Green Queen didn't start out as a company that I was thinking, oh, I'm going to start Green Queen and I'm going to make a ton of money, so I'm going to look at it from a business point of view. I don't come from a media background, so, traditional one. So for me, Green Queen, there was always that space to really be very meaningful with it, and really kind of thoughtful and And it just didn't make any sense to me that I would believe that the best way to cut down your carbon footprint was to reduce meat and dairy, but then I'd be advocating for meat and dairy, even though I was only advocating for ethical meat and dairy, but still, it just didn't make any sense. And I think there was this kind of psycho spiritual awakening that I didn't expect.
Yeah. I'm curious. We talked a little bit off the air, and I think one of the things that struck me most when I was researching Green Queen and your efforts therein, and I think you talk a little bit about this in your TEDx talk. You talk about you wanted to help, convert people to more of an eco and healthy lifestyle, and you pulled out these three core tenets that you felt like you had to make it, personal, local, and easy. You had to pull out these tenets and how you did it. And then when you look at your site, you can kind of see that you've curated it through those lenses and things like that. How fluidly were you able to do that? Like, as you started to look at your site and how to manifest these aspects of like conversion and communication and education, were you aware of the core tenets that you immediately needed to do, or did it kind of slowly start to form itself over time?
Definitely it happened over time, because when I started Green Queen, what I was doing is I'm a natural information sharer because I'm a huge researcher. So I'm the person that in my social group that people are going to call and say, hey, do you know where I can get this? Or do you know which restaurant I can go to for this? Or where's a good place for, grabbing this? And so I have this tendency to really collect the best addresses, the most delicious restaurants. And so when I changed my life to go green and healthy, I accumulated this list of addresses, and Green Queen was really the first step. Was really, let me share this stuff online so that other people can find it. And it happened that I hit a nerve. It was a small nerve because it's Hong Kong in 2011, but there was a growing awareness of health and wellness and how the way we were eating wasn't working, and yoga was becoming more important, and drinking juice was becoming more important. And it started very much with the idea of health, and health is personal, and health affects you. And everybody at that time that was, I think, coming to Green Queen was coming more from that health side. And I don't want to say that it's the more selfish side, but it's definitely the more inward looking side, right? And later, as I said, I don't come from a traditional media, so I wasn't trained as an editor at a magazine or something. But what I realized quite early on was, I'm going to bring you to Green Queen for what you're looking for, but then I'm going to expose you to this other stuff, the serious stuff. And what's really interesting about being the editor and being a content curator is that I find it imperative that we have a responsibility, not just to give people candy. You know what I mean? You have to give, and I hate that analogy because I'm not a big candy person, and I think kids are completely able to love broccoli. My son certainly does, but my point is, I don't just have to give you what you want. I can also give you what is also good for you. So you're going to come to the site because you want to find out more about where to find the best green juice. But hey, while you're here, let me introduce you to this incredible, activist that's like striking for the climate. And so it's this idea of, that's my job as an editor. My job is to give you stuff that maybe you weren't looking for, but it might move you, it might inspire you, it might empower you to change. And that's why I wrote about companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible in 2016, when no one here was writing about them until 2018, 2019, and that was very in small amounts. But that's how we were able to carve ourselves as really a leader, because I was making these decisions that even if I wasn't going to get the most eyeballs on a post, right? Like, so we started talking about zero waste in 2014. Now, zero waste wasn't a buzzword then.
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to take these content risks, and add, content that people were not necessarily looking for. But then when the trend does hit, you're there. You're at the crux of it because you've been writing about it. We were writing about the plastic waste issue. We were covering all this stuff way before it was trendy, because that's what my job was. My editorial curation job was to say, okay, here's what everybody wants. They want like the 10 best healthy restaurants in Central and Hong Kong, but here's some other stuff that is really important and really inspiring. And then of course you would hope it's well written and it's engaging. And so in terms of engaging and well written, I will say I took a little bit of a different view to the typical lifestyle publications. I think Green Queen, something that I am, proud of is that we really take our research seriously. I think we're a little bit more serious. I don't think we're similar to some of the other, like, more lifestyle publications in our space, because I think the way we approach the information is a little bit more rigorous, a little bit more researched, a little bit more in depth, because I'm a nerd and that's what I like. I'm a reader. I'm a dinosaur. I like to read. And so it is different. And when we first got an Instagram account, I made the decision, because we operate on a tiny team, no budget, no marketing budget. And so I made the decision that Instagram was not something we could invest heavily in, because to have a perfect Instagram that was going to get us 100,000 followers, that was like 4 hours a day of work.
Yeah.
And that's just not where most of our traffic was coming from. It comes from Google and our SEO and our ranking. And so I just focused on the written, which some might, say, well, you should have done a video show or whatever, but for me, there is still value in that reporting the news and sharing inspiring stories in a written format.
Absolutely. You talked a little bit about like tripwires, or I call them gateway drugs into, the vegan universe. And it's a lot of people I've interviewed, over 50 to 60 experts and lay people alike. Everyone's got some kind of a gateway or a tripwire that brought them to the vegan world. So it was a health scare. It was a need for weight loss. It was a need for environmentalism. It
So,
was something like that.
sorry, Kathleen, I lost you for a second there.
Okay, let me back up. It's okay. Let me write it down so I can edit it out. So, I've spoken with like over the past, 6 months, I've spoken with over 50 different experts and lay people alike, and everyone has some kind of a tripwire or a gateway drug that brought them into, not a gateway drug, but a gateway moment rather, that brought them into the vegan world. And so it's frequently like a health scare or a need for weight loss or environmental impact, sustainability, things like that. And you speak a little bit to this in some of your rhetoric when you talk about, your endeavors. But I'm wondering if you have like, do you at Green Queen, do you have like a top 5 that you kind of use as, or that you view that people can kind of come into the vegan world, or that bring people into it? You've mentioned, sustainability, environmental ego impact. We've talked about health through your own personal narrative. What are the other avenues that you see bringing people into looking and analyzing the vegan world through?
Well, I think in Asia, we're at a different stage. I think definitely health is going to be the primary focus. And we have I would say we have a lot more readers that are plant-based or looking to reduce than we have just 100% vegan readers. For me, I don't have a top 5 as much as I have how can I give my readers as much information all the time as possible that is kind of spurring them on in terms of making that change, and kind of making it so that the facts just tell the story for them. And so that's going to be, talking a lot about how your seafood is caught, and how, the connection between plastic in the ocean and marine life. And, you know, for me, I can tell you that it really was learning what happened to baby cows,
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't really understand what was wrong with drinking milk and eating cheese before that.
Yeah.
Like, I understood not eating meat and not eating flesh, but it felt to me like eggs and dairy were benign because we weren't killing the animals.
Right.
So for me, it was that, oh my goodness, I'm participating in cruelty and harm. But I think for a lot of our readers, it's health. It's really connecting it to health. So we do a lot of coverage of, you know, the benefits of a vegan, like any study that's going to come out that's, you know, reputable, we're going to cover it to talk about, okay, well, you know, heart disease and diabetes and strokes and, you know, carcinogenics in meat and all that. And that seems to be where there's a connection, because I think people go on a journey, and in Asia, I think the journey starts a lot with health.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think globally too, given the pandemic that we're, currently involved in, and as a world, I think health has had a huge impact on how people return to considering relationships between environment, diet, and their own personal body and the bodies of those around them. I want to flip flop things because we didn't define terms, and that's a fault of mine, and I don't care because we'll turn to it now. And I'm going to have you, as I say these terms, I'd just like you to proffer up the definition as it occurs in your mind, not necessarily as as you would find in a dictionary, but when you hear these terms, how would you turn and describe them to your child or your friend? So let's start off with vegan. How do you define vegan in juxtaposition or alone unto itself as opposed to plant-based?
For me, vegan, it's a whole life philosophy, and it's basically no slaughter, no cruelty, no exploitation of the animal.
Yeah. And then,
So that extends to more. For me, vegan is very much more than food.
right, it's an entire lifestyle.
Right. And that is very different. In my head, plant-based tends to be just food specific.
Food. And what does it mean to food? Is it food that is based on plants? Is it foods that contain plants? How would you define that?
So I would say I understand it in two different dimensions. One is just the word plant-based, which means it would contain plants. But the other is in reference to a diet choice or a menu, and that is where it is primarily a plant-containing dish or menu. And I find this term a little bit sometimes difficult because it's very clear that some of our readers understand plant-based as optional plants, and others understand it very much as 100% plants. We tend to use it as 100% plants, but really specifically related to food.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how would you describe your definition of raw veganism?
Food that is not cooked above 42 degrees Celsius.
And
Wait,
that
is it 42 or 52? I may be getting that wrong. But basically the temperature stop. So really no fire, I think, is probably the best.
Okay. And an omnivore, which you used previous. So you called yourself a raw vegan briefly, and then also an omnivore. How do you define that?
You eat a little bit of everything. And I think it's important to talk about the word omnivore, because I've come to understand that when people say omnivore, they probably mean carnivore.
Mm-hmm.
And we are not supposed to be carnivores. You could make an argument that we're supposed to be plant-based, but you could also make an argument that we're omnivore. And that means primarily nuts, seeds, plants, and legumes and grains, and then a little bit of whatever else. But that could include also insects or eating, rats or something. It's not this idea that, you have to have steak 3 times a day, which, yeah, for me is off. But yeah, omnivore, I mean, I'm an anthropologist by study, so there was an actual definition, so that stays in my head, which is, you eat a little bit of everything
And so
that's around.
in juxtaposition to that, carnivore would be someone who eats mainly meat.
Right, like in the animal world, carnivore means you eat only meat. Obviously, in our world, it tends to mean people who eat um, meat at every meal, and meat is the center of their plate and is maybe the largest portion of the food that they're eating.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I think a lot of people do have those terms very mixed up, or at least not mixed up, clear for them, however, not clear for those that they're communicating with, and this is why I always ask people to clarify their terms, because I think that we all think we have these definitions down. As far as I hear a lot of my meat eating colleagues describe themselves as carnivores, but I have always interpreted it. And there's actually a carnivore diet out now called the Lion Diet as well. And that they subsist only on red meat. And so,
Right, and fine. That is how fine. That is what the animal kingdom would be. But that's just I don't know. Okay, well,
that's another
maybe
story for another time.
maybe for them saying you're only eating plants is just as extreme. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to quickly dive into Ekowarehouse, the global sourcing platform for certified organic products. What are the endeavors there? Like, what are the main points that you guys are working with? Do you have main clients or contracts that come to you? What is your point of operation?
So we're the connector. So we're just a platform where buyers in the business world, so it is trade only, come to look for certified organic suppliers who have certified organic products. And the organic market, it's not as much in vogue anymore, but it actually, numbers wise, it's just booming faster than you can imagine. In fact, in the US, domestic organic food supply is just oversubscribed, oversold. And so American companies need to look outside for organic producers. And we actually have our largest group of buyers is from the US. And then it's Asia and Europe. But what we do that is unique is that we're verifying the companies that we showcase on the site. So they would pay us a membership fee, but if they cannot produce valid business registration documents and organic certification documents that we're able to check, and we don't just accept any organic certificates, they need to be organic certificates backed by a national or international or agricultural standard. So in the US, it's the National Organic Program. In Europe, it's the EU Organic regulation. In the UK, you've got the Soil Association standard. There's a few in Asia. Taiwan has a really good one. China has their own national organic framework. So we take documents that have a framework behind it. So it's government or international nonprofit. We're not just going to accept a certificate from a private company that's just saying, oh, well, we're organic. It has to have a backing of a standard. And so we verify those documents, and if they are valid, then you can go live. And then we basically, create this online profile for you. You upload your information, and we make sure that there's really strong SEO and that people can find you on Google, and then you can buyers can come online and do some searches, and then connect with the supplier using our messaging system.
Nice. I like that. I like brokerage matchmaking. I think that it's the wave of the new. People have asked me a lot when I speak on other podcasts where I feel like the trending sources are headed, given that I've spoken to a lot of the industries in the vegan world. And I think this kind of brokerage situation, even as it comes to financing and money with different, funds and things like that in the States, I think that's like the next wave, of having entire funds dedicated to plant-based vegan options and things like that are going to become much more in vogue. And so this brokerage, this matchmaking solution that you have with these, certified individuals is, I feel like it's going to be trending as one of the more powerful avenues of enterprise in the industry. But that's just my suspicion. I want to return really quickly to rapid fire questions because we're running out of time, Sonalie, and I don't want our audience to feel left out ever. So I've a few questions here, about 9 that we've pulled together. For those of you listening, my team grabs everything, as you guys know. And so anyone who's written in a question, we kind of try to form a whole bunch of them into one. So hopefully a bunch of your questions are answered with the expertise of Sonalie. So I'm going to get right to it. We had a bunch of people write in and ask if you've tried different kinds of veganism, which you have with the raw veganism, and how do you label yourself as a vegan, and do you ever find it coming into question or controversy when you speak to people?
I do find it um, questioned a lot. So I sometimes explain that I am plant-based. I sometimes, it really depends. I mean, I will use the term vegan happily, but where I live, it is often a misunderstood term. There is often a misunderstanding between vegan and vegetarian. So I would need to sometimes qualify, no eggs, no dairy. Sometimes I have to say things like no fish.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to say that where I am in the world, and I think maybe this is true everywhere, the terms are still not clear enough that I can just use them and be sure that, and the other thing is, and this is something that is sad, but I do want to address it, is that there is this kind of feeling for the general public that if you're a vegan, you have to tell everyone and you have to make, sort of proselytize. And that's not my personality. I always joke that I'm a born Hindu, right? Because I'm half Indian Punjabi. And so I always joke that Hindus, as Hindu, we don't believe in converting people. So I take a much more quiet approach. Not that I'm saying I'm a quiet person, but I just don't, that's not the angle I come from. The angle I come from is, oh, here's how I cook delicious food and I never use, meat or dairy, or here's like, it's the number one thing you can do to reduce your carbon footprint. I tend to talk more about things like Green Monday and kind of reducing. I tend to focus on reducing rather than just communicating that I am exclusively vegan.
Yeah. We had a lot of questions about being in the media and curating sites and informing people in education. What are some of the greatest misconceptions you run into about vegan culture, vegan companies, any of those things? You have your finger on the pulse of so many different kinds of things that you write about. What do you think the greatest misconceptions about vegan still is today?
Well, first of all, that it's unhealthy and that you can't get enough protein or something ridiculous when most of us consume too much protein in general. Like that, I mean, the nutrition is the number one thing. I have a child and he is plant-based, and um, I find myself sometimes just not going too crazy about that in terms of talking to people, because people have really strange ideas about what, I mean, it's like suddenly there was this cartoon I saw this week that really made me laugh, because it was basically saying no one cared about my nutrition until I told them I was vegan. And that's how I feel. I feel like that's the biggest misconception. It's the first question is, where's your protein at? And you're sitting there going, did you care before? I mean, I could have just been eating, fries the whole time before, but somehow now that I've got this label, you're concerned. Where's my protein coming from? So yeah, the nutrition is just so silly. The idea that eating plants and would not give you an adequate amount of nutrients and vitamins and minerals is just so silly.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. And there's another one of my favorites. I have a really good girlfriend who only recently became vegan, but she's got all the great logo wear, which is, the sign of a new convert anyway. But she has one that says, don't ask me about my protein and I won't ask you about your cholesterol, which is kind
that's a good one. I need to get that t-shirt. Okay, maybe I need, you know what? I need better t-shirts. I'm gonna ask you for that website.
Yes, absolutely. You should just reach out. People will send these to you. I'm positive. We send them to the Green Queen, everyone. So we had a lot of people write in and ask about, because you're located, on the other side of the globe from the United States audience and people that write in, people are very curious. I've written a little bit about, and I've interviewed a lot of vegans from Ireland and Australia and different parts of the world. But for you in Hong Kong, as things stand right now, are there vegan? So there are like YouTube stars and stuff in the United States that are also vegan, and they're these massive influencers and things like that that have really attached their brand to veganism. Does that exist yet in Hong Kong? Are there like young rock star chefs that are vegan, or is any of that happening yet over there? And if so, what does that seem like?
Yes, we have one of the most important vegan chefs in the world, and that is Peggy Chan. She had a restaurant called Grassroots Pantry for a long time that was probably the most influential plant-based restaurant in Asia in terms of really changing people's minds. There are starting to be a great deal of, I would say, vegetarian and maybe no egg. But the word vegan is complicated because in different languages, it is not a one-to-one translation in the same way. Okay. One of the most interesting things that I've heard recently, and I really want to explain this to answer this question. So what we also have in Hong Kong is David Young. He is the founder of Green Monday. He's also the founder of Green Common, which is Asia's first retail and cafe plant-based chain. He's also the distributor of Beyond Meat, Just Egg, Miyoko's Cheese Creamery, Califia Farms. So he's a real visionary. He's also the founder of Omni Foods, which created Omni Pork, our first minced pork plant-based alternative. And now it's also Omni Luncheon Meat, which is a vegan version of Spam, which is incredibly good. I didn't even grow up eating Spam, but it's delicious. And Spam is a huge deal in Hong Kong. In a recent survey, it was shown that in Hong Kong, people eat Spam at least once a week. So this is a game changer. He also has Omni Strip, which is vegan pork strips. So he focuses on foods that make a really big impact for Asian cuisine. And so he created his movement from right here in Hong Kong, and people thought he was crazy. And I know him very well. We've been on this journey. We kind of started at a similar time, and obviously we support Green Monday and Green Common and their endeavors a lot. And I know his team really well. His executive director, Jenny, is one of my personal mentors. And he was on a podcast recently, and he was explaining that when he first found out about the movement to reduce meat, he found out about Meatless Monday in the US and Meat-Free Monday in the UK. But in Hong Kong and in Cantonese, meatless, you see, is a bit of a problem word. One, it's negative. It implies, restraint or not having something. But two, in Cantonese, the word for meat and the word for food are the same in certain parlance. So saying meat free was essentially like saying no food, and that just wasn't going to work. And so he then rebranded it as Green Monday, and that was a brilliant stroke of genius because I think it's so much more inviting. Just the word Green Monday brings light to it. The word green is a positive word today. So funny because when I started and I was Green Queen, it was a good name, but people were thinking, really, you're going to go into this green industry? Is that really going to be big? So anyway, jokes on them. But to answer the question, in Asia, I don't want to get caught up on the terms, but there are 100% now today influencers on Instagram and on YouTube that are cooking, that are talking about veganism, that are talking about cruelty to animals, that are identifying themselves by the virtue of eating plants. And it is growing. And Green Monday is really good at getting a lot of these people on board. So it has a lot of the actresses and the spokespeople and the television stars and the musicians that really want to, they're either very, very much, they eat almost no meat, or they are vegan. And on Instagram, we have a lot.
Nice. I have, and I think that it would be all over the world as well. I think, you know, that the YouTube star generation has just begun. And so it's awesome to hear about that. I like the attachment with green because it draws in the inevitable conversation, no matter who comes to veganism for just dropping weight to, you know, clearing up their skin or whatever, vanity based, health based, anything. It always, these people always inevitably come back around to talk with me months later, years later, and talk about the environment. And so I think that you know, drawing that entire circle at full round with the first blush of the name is genius, both with yourself and David Yoon. Um, we had a lot of people write in and ask you personally, as the curator of a media site, do you have like a Bible source that you turn to? You mentioned the China study, you know, Colin Campbell's remarkable work, yeah, and seminal. But do you have current things? Do you have other outlets that you look towards to kind of stay abreast? Like, how are you kind of vetting your own news into what to look into regarding veganism?
So I think to do my job, you have to be a bit of a news junkie.
Yeah.
And I'm a news junkie. I will read, for my personal consumption, I prefer long form media. So as I said, I'm really old fashioned. I'm a dinosaur. I like to read, 10,000 word essays. That is not obviously the case for most of my generation, but so that's my personal, what I enjoy. I enjoy, the New Yorker, the long pieces, the Guardian long read, the Atlantic long reads, really long, in-depth stuff, because I love opinion editorials. But in terms of news, I read everything. I read lifestyle. I have so many fantastic newsletters that come into my inbox. I read, every headline, and I don't just read about the environment. I follow politics very closely. I follow business news very closely. I think it's really important to really have that breadth so that I can put things in context, because we do have quite a decent business reader kind of group that follows Green Queen, because we have really become the alternative protein source for Asia. So
Yeah.
so it's really important for me to understand, funding and branding and all of that. But basically the thing is everything. But probably my favorite newspaper in the whole world would be The Guardian. It's the one I read the most of. That app is the most open app on my phone.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely the kind of person, no matter where I am, if I've got 2 minutes, I'm going to be checking what's going on in the news. And I don't know. I'm not just, as I said, I wasn't so much of a blogger where I'll just, write one thing for a week and make it a really long post. I like to have a lot of information about a lot of things.
Yeah, absolutely. The more, the better the opinion, right? I'm wondering, so our final question was based on people asking, because you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening on such a constant basis with news and media regarding veganism. Where do you see the future of the vegan world headed? This has become a topic that a lot of people, even people who don't like to look at the future in that term, predict things with COVID, have kind of started getting a little bit more boisterous about, because it's kind of encouraged this global conversation. The IPO of Impossible I don't think it's launched yet, and people are kind of going crazy about Beyond and all the things that it could implement.
Yeah,
This,
don't know if Impossible is going to IPO soon, because they just have so much private money. Beyond obviously is so exciting. We did just do a story on Just Egg is talking about an IPO maybe next year.
people are not talking about them being the next unicorns in the industry, these ideas that they could be so powerful so quickly. Where do you personally see, not even just on the money specter or the market of products,
Yeah.
where do you personally see the vegan scene heading towards or ending up at in the next 5 years?
So I think it's going to be a really interesting time for vegans, because we're in the middle, or we're at the beginning of a massive food revolution. Okay. We are going to see a complete sea of change in how the food on our plate is produced and sourced. And so, and it's never been stronger than it is now. Like the tides are turning, the revolution is really starting. There's been buildup for years, but it started, a couple years ago, and it's happening. We're at the beginning of it. And I think there's going to be a massive need for a sort of mental adjustment as a vegan, because for so long vegans have been, derided and excluded and marginalized. And we have this, if you talk to a lot of vegans on a deep level about, how they feel, I think a lot of them feel very, misunderstood and ignored and condescended to. And there's sort of this idea that, you go into a dinner party, you mention you're vegan, and people can just, make fun of you and ask you about your nutrition, which is none of their business, and all of this. So suddenly being vegan is a very positive, empowered, smart, responsible choice because of everything we now know. And so vegans have to kind of assume that and kind of just like rejig. But so that's one. That I do want to touch on the psychology of what it means to be vegan and how that's going to change, because veganism is just going to get huge. We're still a tiny part of the market, but it's going to become a mega thing. And so there are going to be so many vegan brands in all sides, not just food. And there's going to be so many vegan activists and spokespeople and so much more to come. So we're not going to be so marginalized anymore. And that's a mind shift that has to happen. But the other mind shift that has to happen, and this might be the harder one, is pragmatism. And I say that because we cannot afford to just be in this you're vegan or you're not mentality. We need more of this kind of Green Monday bridging. And the other thing that's coming is the discussion of cell-based and fermented foods and sort of the other alternative food production methods, where, I do believe that, cell-based meat and seafood and dairy is not only coming, I know it's coming, I speak to the founders, I see the technology, but I think it's going to be a huge part of how people eat. And I think that if you really believe, if you really are a vegan because you don't want animals to be hurt, I think it's kind of important to embrace those technologies. Even if you don't want to consume the products of those technologies yourself.
Yeah.
And I think we need to really be on side. And we need to make sure that there just doesn't become this schism between, oh, well, that's not vegan, that's cell-based. Yes, it's true, but it's slaughter-free. And that's why I use the term slaughter-free. And that's why I, for example, do not advocate for insect protein. Because for me, it's like, well, if we can grow animals from cells, and why do we need to harvest insects? Unless we're growing the insects from cells. Yeah. But basically, we don't need to exploit animal lives anymore. We've now finally used our human ingenuity and penchant for tech innovation to really find a solution that is slaughter-free, cruelty-free. The other thing I love about cell-based meat is that it's local, so you can have bioreactors and production locally in every city, so you cut down on the transport air miles. And so I think vegans really need to embrace it. I hope that we do, because we need these solutions to be everywhere, and we need them to become mainstream. And so we can't be just cutting things out. And the best, what I really recommend to everyone listening here is to read the interview we just did with Liz Marshall. She is a Canadian award-winning filmmaker, and she's about to release her movie Meat the Future, meat spelled MEAT, and it's a documentary about one of the pioneers of cell-based food, and that is Uma Valeti, the founder of Memphis Meats. And it's kind of her following him on this journey as he kind of really defines an industry and tries to get funding and sets up this groundbreaking company. And I think it's the first, I know it's the first film about cell-based meat, and she's a vegan herself, and she's very much an activist vegan and an ethical vegan, and she has some fantastic things to say on this topic, on how we need to embrace this.
Interesting. Well, drop us on a bombshell as we go out. I love it. It's food for thought. Sonali, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today and
You
all of your candor and your rhetoric. I really do appreciate it. I know it's early in the morning over there, and I appreciate you taking the time.
perfect way to start my day. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, we've been speaking with Sonalie Figueiras. She's the founder and CEO and editor in chief at Green Queen. You can find out more on www.greenqueen.com.hk, as well as www.ekowarehouse.com. We discussed both of those endeavors. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. And until we speak again next time, remember to stay safe, eat responsibly and clean when you do eat, and always bet on yourself. Sluncha.